Hey everybody, JB back with you once again for another board game cube shelf run-through video. We are on the final shelf of the second row of cubes, and I'm really excited to talk about this one because there's a lot of good stuff here. So let's go ahead and jump right in, starting with this one, which is the final game of the BoardGameTables.com series, On Tour. And this is actually the first game that they came out with, interestingly enough. On Tour is a roll and write style routing game in which you are a rock band trying to plan a summer trip across the United States. The ultimate goal is that you are trying to get as many states visited on this trip, but you have to draw a single continuous route that goes through states that are numbered, either equivalent to the previous one or ascending relative to the previous one. So for example, 1, 2, 3, 7, 7, 16, 28, etc., that would be totally fine. But if you tried doing like 1, 2, 3, 7, and then 6, you couldn't connect that last one since it's a lower number. The actual gameplay of this is really simple, but I think that's what makes it so good. One player rolls these two 10-sided dice. You can see them right there. And out of those two numbers that you get, you can form two different numbers. So for example, 5 and 7, those two individual numbers, can form 57 and 75. Now over here, this other picture here shows the setup of the general gameplay around the table, where you have these 4 boards. I actually have 12 boards here in the box, but then you have the dice, and then you have a deck of cards from which you draw 3 per turn. And of those 3 cards, you pick 2 of them to correlate to where you're going to place your 2 numbers. So for example, 57 could correlate to the middle card, and 75 could go with the right card, for example. Those cards show you a region of the country in which you could draw your number. So for example, going vertical, there's north and south, but then going horizontal, there's west, central, and east. So each state sits at the intersection of 2 of those regions. But what gets really interesting about this is that each card also has a very specific state on which you could write the number. And if you write it there, you can circle the state, and a circled state is worth an extra point at the end. So the game is going to constantly tempt you with all these options like, hey, you can write your number here. You could totally make that, right? You just got to fill up a few more spots along the way to connect all that. And you're going to find yourself up a creek if you fall for too many of these things. It's such a cool set of decisions to make. And I think what makes this interesting is that at its core, it's just a simple number sequencing puzzle. But I think the fact that they applied this theme to it and the presentation that looks really stark and nice, and the fact that it's about travel, that little bit of thematic flavor makes this pop, for lack of a better word. And I think it gives it enough connective tissue for people to latch onto it. There's also an app version of this available, as well as a second edition that's coming out later this year in a thinner box, similar to the Bytes and QE boxes. I'm planning on getting that because it also has a Europe map on the reverse side of the boards, so I might end up selling this edition of this. But that's On Tour. Check it out if that sounds interesting, because it's a lot of fun. All right, going with a similar sort of art style here for the box, we have this game, Villagers, by a new publisher called Sinister Fish Games. Villagers is a card drafting game, very similar to Point Salad, although I will say it's probably a little bit of a step up in terms of overall depth than Point Salad is. Because what you're doing in this one is that you are building a little village by creating what essentially amounts to tech trees. Like if you've ever played a role-playing game and you develop a character across a series of spaces that are on like a route that you're taking as far as how you're going to develop, that's a tech tree. And you're kind of doing that in this game with these different suits of cards that have certain types of developments on them, but also paths that you can go down with your development that branch off in certain places. And as you do so, you're going to be upgrading what you have and getting more and more powerful versions of the cards that you already have on there. And you can create all these cool synergies, as the box says here, with these cards. Really, really fun. It's a simple game, but yet it offers a lot in it. I got the Kickstarter version, which has like a little mini expansion and some wooden coins in it. But a lot of fun and a really nice package. Like, this is a small box, but it's got a lot of game in here. That is Villagers. Okay, speaking of even smaller boxes, we're going to take a look at this one, Hanavi, which is one of the first games I bought back in the day. This one was released, I think in 2011 to 2012. I can't exactly remember when. At least overseas. I think it came to the US in 2013, maybe. But it was designed by Antoine Boza, who did Seven Wonders and Takenoko. And this is a really interesting game. I think this is one of those games that has since inspired a lot of copycats, where there's a cooperative objective that you're trying to reach, but there's limited communication involved in reaching that objective. So a good example of this that we explored earlier would be like Letter Jam. But I would say that this is an even simpler game than Letter Jam. What you're doing is that you're trying to build this fireworks display. It's all really abstract. You're just trying to create 5 piles of cards, one for each suit of the game that goes from 1 to 5. And what you have to do is that you have to lay down the necessary cards without looking at them. So all the cards in your hand are faced away from you, and you're giving clues to each other about certain things in your hand, like all these cards are 3, or all these cards are green, or this one card is blue, for example. And based on that, you have to then make inferences about when you want to play the cards, and hopefully playing them in order. Because if you play them out of order, you get a strike in the form of like a fuse. And if you get 3 fuses, everything explodes and the game is instantly lost. On top of that, there's also the element of the number of clues you can give. So for example, I could give a clue, but I'm expending a clue token by doing that and flipping it over. I could get it back though by discarding a card, but the catch with that is that if I discard a card, I'm going to then have to draw another card, and if the whole deck runs out, then we're out of time. So you have to be careful with how many clues you give and how efficient you can be when giving them. It's a really simple game, but it's a really fun one to try to master and get better at. I've taught this game to a lot of different groups, and they always want to try playing it again to see if they can do better on the second go around. It's a lot of fun, and it's really simple. That's Hanavi. Okay, so in the last video, I introduced you all to Raiders of the North Sea over here at the end of the previous shelf. And in this video, we'll continue going down that line of games that was released by Garphill Games in conjunction with, here in the US, with Renegade Game Studios. And I'm going to start the new trilogy that they've been releasing stuff for, called the West Kingdom Trilogy, with this first game, Architects of the West Kingdom. Released in 2018, this game instantly caught my eye when it was on Kickstarter. I didn't back it, but I did think this could be really good if it's what I'm thinking it is. What it does is it takes the classic worker placement formula where you put little meeples down on spots, and it turns it on its head a little bit because it introduces a concept that the game calls worker investment. In other words, the more you place in something, the more you can get. So for example, let's say I placed a guy over here in the forest. I could get 1 wood from that. But then on the next turn, if I placed a second one, I could get 2 wood. And then if I placed another one, I could get 3, and so on and so forth. And then the game also gives you this option to round up people's workers by going to this town center area here, and then grabbing a bunch of opponents' things to capture and then send into jail for money. It's a really fun set of player interactions, and I think that's what makes it interesting, is that you're kind of having to keep each other in check to ensure that you're not really letting anybody get too powerful. The theme of it is kind of hit or miss. It's just about building like a cathedral in ancient France, I think, like not ancient, but like 9th century or that's era of European history. I also like the fact that there's a little bit of engine building with these cards over here. You can kind of see at the edge, these are apprentices that you can use. They give you special abilities when you go to certain spaces. There's also an expansion that just came out called Age of Artisans, which I've only played with solo during the quarantine, but it's really cool in that it takes the idea of these cards and allows you to customize them by adding more stuff on them. You also have these green building cards that you're ultimately trying to build, and you can even use the artisan cards to customize those and get additional points for them. All in all, this is a really fun game. I love how there's some innovation going on with this worker placement genre. It's not just put a guy here and then get stuff. So that's Architects of the West Kingdom, a very fun game. Highly recommended. It's in my top 10, and it's probably going to stay there for at least a little while. The sequel to Architects of the West Kingdom is this puppy right here, Paladins of the West Kingdom. This is in contrast to its predecessor, a much heavier game. Maybe not much heavier, but it certainly is a lot more about building synergies and combos, and it's a lot more of a dry Euro-style game where you're using the workers in very specific ways. So each player has the opportunity to get these different colored workers at the start of each round, and by drafting cards that tell you which ones you can get, you then have a path forward for where you can place them on your own player board. So the player boards all have these different spots that require either just general, any color of worker or very specific ones. You can kind of see there's blue ones and black ones and whatnot. And so you kind of have to be careful about which ones you get. There's also wild ones that you can get that give you money potentially, but you also get these suspicion cards that then rack up. And if you have the most when what's it called, the tax stand runs out of money, then you get a visit from the Inquisition, and then you have to gain a debt, which is negative points unless you can pay it off. So there's this kind of give and take relationship between getting more powerful, but also potentially at a cost. And then on top of that, you've also got the different things you could do with these workers. There's different kind of development tracks you can go down, which sort of build on each other in a rock, paper, scissors sort of way. There's just a lot going on here. The rules are probably not very complicated to teach, but the decisions are such that they're very repercussive. They have an impact on your future turns. And you kind of have to think 3 or 4 moves ahead to ensure that what you're doing is actually beneficial. I like this game because it really makes use of the cards in such a way that allows them to have multiple uses. I feel like a lot of the stuff that went into the expansion for Architects was originally found in this game to some extent. It's a really fun package, and I keep finding new things to do every time I play it, so this one's probably going to stick around for a while. In addition, there's a third game that's going to be coming out later this year, tentatively, called Viscounts of the West Kingdom, and it's probably going to be sitting in this spot where the next game we're going to look at is currently sitting, because I'm going to be moving this one to the top of the shelf later this year. But for now, let's take a look at it here. This is Role Player. Now, Role Player was a game that came out a few years ago, and it instantly caught my attention because of the premise. So normally when you play an RPG like Dungeons and Dragons, there's a process you go through at the very start where you roll a character. In other words, you try to create a character that you will use and roll dice to kind of gain the stats and maybe even some of the attributes of the character. Well, this game is all about doing that. It's basically all about just creating a character. And I really like it because it takes the idea of placing and drafting dice from like a central board, and then you put them into this character board here, and you have to do certain things with the dice to get points. So for example, here on the left side, you can see an alignment card, and if you can get to a certain point on the 3x3 grid of, lawful and chaotic and good and evil, then you can get points at the end. And then over here, you've got different attribute scores that you can get, or amounts that you can get, and then get scores based on if you fell into that range. And then down here, you have certain colored dice that form part of your backstory if you can get them in certain spaces, and you can get points for that. But then on top of that, the different spaces that you put them into, the 6 different stats, which are the 6 standard D&D stats, strength, dexterity, constitution, intelligence, wisdom, and charisma, all of those have their own special abilities too. So for example, strength allows you to flip a die to its reverse side. Dexterity allows you to switch dice. Constitution allows you to raise or lower the amount by 1. Intelligence allows you to get a reroll on any die. Wisdom can allow you to move your attribute marker around. And then charisma gives you a discount at the market so you can haggle with the merchants there. And the market has all these different cards that give you weapons for your character. You can get traits for your character that move your alignment around. Special skills that you can use, and every time you do, you have to move your cube and the alignment track. There's just a lot of different things to consider in this puzzle, but it's all in all a fairly accessible game. Like, all of the things I just described may make it sound a little complicated, but it's really not. It's actually pretty simple overall. On top of that, there's an expansion that came out that I fit in this box called Monsters and Minions, which adds a little bit of actual battling to the game that you could use your character on. you can, instead of going to the market, you could battle a minion, and every time you do, you gain a bit of a clue that you can use to aid in the final fight against a boss monster at the end of the whole game. And the better you do in that, the more points you can get. There's also a second expansion coming out later this year called Fiends and Familiars, which will offer like a giant mega box for the game, which is why I'm going to put it on the top of the shelf. But for now, it all fits in this box. That is Role Player. It's really fun. It's been compared to the game Sagrada a bunch. I don't know if anyone watching has heard of that one, but this is kind of like a more gamer's version of Sagrada. Despite that, though, it's pretty accessible, and it's one that I love introducing to my D&D friends. Okay, this next game is a more recent addition to the collection as of last fall, and that is Parks. Parks is a game that was created by publisher Keymaster Games and first-time designer Henry Audubon, and it's made in conjunction with the 59 Parks print series, which is a collection of artwork of the national parks that's just downright gorgeous. Like, this front cover here alone is amazing, but just imagine this times 60. I mean, it's just incredible. For lack of a better word, this is what I like to call like a recipe fulfillment game, where you're trying to collect cards, but you need to collect resources to get the cards. And so the more of those you can collect and the more efficiently you can collect them, the better your chances are of getting the cards you want. So all the cards in the game here are national parks, and your ultimate goal is to try to get the most points by visiting them. But each round of the game, there's 4 rounds, you're going to be moving one of your hikers here along a trail. And this trail is, much like Patchwork had its time track, this is also kind of a forward-facing time track where the pace of the game is going to be dictated by you moving along this thing. You also have this campfire token, which I don't think is pictured here. Yeah, I can't see it. That dictates whether or not you can share a spot with somebody else. And if you can make it to the very end of the trail, you can reignite it. So you can't really just land anywhere you want. You got to pick an empty spot most of the time. But each of these spots gives you a resource or a special ability. And then at the very end of the trail, you can do things like buy gear, which allow you to gain some more efficiencies with resources. Or you could visit a park by paying resources, which are things like sunshine, rain, mountains, and forests. It's pretty abstract, but what makes the game sing is just the presentation. Not only is the artwork gorgeous, but the thing here that says easy setup and storage, yeah, this game is incredibly easy to set up. It's probably one of the most accessible games from a setup perspective that I've seen in a while. And that's thanks in no small part to these trays that fit all the resources and the way it all fits in the box. It's just a really fun game. I think the closest thing I could really compare it to is the game Tokaido. I don't know if anyone watching has heard of that one, but it has a very similar vibe, but with more variability. And I really like this one. It's gone over very well with every group I've taught it to. Everyone loves the gorgeous arts, the accessible gameplay. It's a really fun game. It's got an expansion coming out later this year, which I'm hoping will be good. That's Parks. Okay, and the final game on the shelf is kind of an unusual one, and that is the last game by Renegade Game Studios. Actually, no, I just got one in the mail that we're going to look at in the final video, and that is Spell Smashers. Spell Smashers is a combination between dungeon crawl and word game, where you are taking cards that you can get here to spell words, and the cards not only have letters, but they also have damage that you can deal with all these monsters that you're trying to fight. So every round, you and your team are going to be going up against these monsters, and when you defeat them, you can get cool stuff, and then in between battles, you can go to town and get upgrades and weapons and other cool things. I have to admit, I totally bought this game because the premise of it fit a lot of my gaming groups and the people in them. I happen to know a lot of people who do like D&D and who do like word games enough that this felt like an instant buy. It's made by the same designer who did Lanterns the Harvest Festival, Christopher Chung. And it's a really pretty game. It's got the same artist as the North Sea and West Kingdom games. It's kind of got a cartoonish look to it, but it still has a very, I don't know, a very fierce look. And I think that combination works really well for a game like this. On top of that, it's just a lot of fun. It's nothing serious strategy-wise or anything, but it's just fun to get these words and build stuff out of the cards and fight the monsters and everything. drink beer to celebrate your victories. That is Spell Smashers. Okay, that is it for this shelf, everybody. Thank you all so much for watching this video. I really appreciate your support as always. Next time we're going to be venturing onward to the 3rd level of shelves. But until then, thank you all so much for watching once again, and I will see you on the next one.